Soon in Northern Virginia, prosecutors began their case against President Trump's former campaign chairman, charging that Manafort orchestrated a conspiracy to avoid paying taxes on millions he made working for a political party in Ukraine and then lying to banks to get loans. Manafort's defense team is accusing his former deputy, Rick Gates, of embezzling millions of dollars. Joining us now, CNN legal analyst and special prosecutor during the Watergate scandal, Richard Benveniste. Richard, good to see you as always.
Good morning, David.
Well, we'll get to Manafort in a second. There's something that's sticking with me this week when we heard Rudy Giuliani on the program a couple of days ago suggesting, I don't even know if collusion would be a crime. The implication of that is that any kind of contact with a foreign power, in this case Russia, trying to interfere in the election would be okay. It is so anathema to any campaign I've ever covered to think that contact with a foreign power under those circumstances would be anywhere near appropriate.
Well, it was pure sophistry for Rudy to start talking about collusion is not a crime, echoed by his boss, Mr. Trump. These two words, collusion and conspiracy, are synonyms. It's conspiracy to violate the law, that is an agreement between two or more persons to do an act that violates the law. In this case, it would be hacking and dissemination of hacked material, interfering with our election, and so forth. Rudy knows better, and it is sad to see him in this way really sullying what was once a reputation for being straight and law-abiding.
So, to the Manafort case, this is first out of the box, the fruits of the Mueller investigation. It is a conventional tax evasion case involving the president's former campaign manager with ties to Putin's Russia because of working for Yanukovych in Ukraine. But this is a judge and a case where the suggestion of some kind of link between the campaign and Manafort is specifically not being made, which Trump allies would say, see, it has nothing to do with this. That's accurate.
Yes, it is. It's accurate. It's a crime that is alleged that the Mueller investigators came across in the course of doing their investigation. And it's entirely within the scope of his responsibility. So he's not to turn a blind eye, nor is the Justice Department, to credible evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, on a grand scope, and the evidence, anecdotal as it is, about the lifestyle, the ostentatiousness of having clothing such as has been described, multiple homes, an inventory of Oriental rugs, et cetera, is probably going to resonate with the public, who will ask why this close associate of the president is now being defended by the president as having been unfairly selected for prosecution. And it's also going to shine a light on the fact that our president, unlike every other person who's run for the highest office of our land, has refused to produce his own tax returns. And there should be no amnesia on the part of America as to what Mr. Trump is hiding by refusing to produce his tax return. So I think all of that will be in focus with this prosecution.
Let me ask you about your experience, actually not in Watergate in this instance, but on the 9/11 Commission, because I think it's really interesting. We've talked this morning about the Russians seeking to potentially interfere again in the midterms, and what we've learned about what they did in 2016. The 9/11, I actually don't think comparing 2016 to 9/11 is appropriate. You can have that debate. We don't have to have it here. But what I do think is appropriate is that what we learned from 9/11 is that it was a failure to imagine what could come next, say after attempting to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993, was part of the problem in terms of government response. When you hear that the light is blinking red again, given your 9/11 experience, what do you worry about what could be coming from Russia in terms of interference?
Well, this analogy was drawn by the president's own Director of National Intelligence, an office that grew out of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. And to ignore the existential threat to this central feature of our democracy, that is open elections, being exploited by a foreign power whose interests have been adverse to our own, is existential. We need to arm ourselves, protect ourselves, and treat this as the threat that it is.
And do you think specifically, when you apply that experience to what we're seeing now, what specifically the government ought to do? What presents itself?
Well, first of all, we need to be quite clear in identifying, as our intelligence community has, that the Russians were behind this intrusion. The evidence is that it is continuing, and we need to put a stop to it. What has been the one thing that has gotten the attention of Mr. Putin and his allies, and that is sanctions levied against the oligarchs and those closest to Putin. In fact, that could be the motivation for why Mr. Putin put his intelligence resources toward defeating Hillary Clinton and getting Trump elected. So let's do that some more. Let's be vigilant in protecting our electoral process.
Right. Richard Benvenista, always good to get your perspective. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, David, so China is now responding to the latest move from the U.S. in the escalating trade war. How is Beijing fighting back?
But first, a domestic abuse survivor uses Thai boxing to overcome her past. Her story in Turning Points.
I'm Casey Lin, a Muay Thai boxer. Muay Thai boxing is Thai kickboxing. You're allowed to use knees and elbows and clinch. When I got in Muay Thai, it was never about self-defense. What I wanted to do was build my trust in men again. I'm a domestic violence survivor. I dated this guy, started deteriorating, and he threatened to kill my family. He started hitting me. And then he pulled out a revolver and threatened me. He stalked me for like a year and a half. I got out of it because he robbed a place and went to jail. Coming out of a domestic violence past, walking into a gym where men hitting other people and like very few women it was a big, big hurdle. When I first started sparring, all of the abuse flooded back to me. But in that moment, if you hit back,
Significantly higher than first announced. CNN's Allison Cossack is here with more on this. Hey, Allison.
Good morning, David. So those trade tensions between the U.S. and China hitting a new high this morning. And right now, there's no sign that either side is willing to give an inch. China now vowing to take countermeasures on the news that the Trump administration is considering more than doubling tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods from 10% to 25%. The move putting pressure on Beijing to return to the negotiating table or up the ante. A Chinese official encouraging dialogue and calling unilateral actions counterproductive. The potentially steeper tariffs could go into effect as soon as next month, but a source familiar with discussion says the move is not finalized and could change. The U.S. has already imposed 25% tariffs on $34 billion in Chinese goods, and China responded in kind. President Trump says the tariff tit for tat will eventually open up markets, which may be the end game, but so far it is destabilizing well-established markets. As a stopgap, the administration announced a week ago it's preparing a $12 billion emergency aid package for farmers caught up in the trade war, but the move has been panned by many Republicans as just a short-term fix. David and Allison.
Okay, Allison, thank you for including 3 members of one family. 70-year-old Melody Bledsoe and her 2 great-grandchildren, 4-year-old Emily Roberts and 5-year-old James Roberts, died in their home on Thursday. Melody's husband, Ed Bledsoe, and his granddaughter, Amanda Woodley, join us now. Ed and Amanda, we are so sorry for your loss. We heard, Ed, your story, and it's just the most haunting, heartbreaking story that we've ever heard. I mean, that you were on the phone with your 5-year-old great-grandson, James, as the fire was moving in. Can you tell us what happened when you went to the doctor? You left the house to go to the doctor. Did you know how close the wildfires were at that moment?
Yeah, the fire was couple of miles away from my house. It was plumb across the river. It wasn't nowhere near my house. And that they didn't give no evacuation notices or nothing. They just, when my wife called me.
A whirlwind of political problems for this president. So I think that question is still out there, but I think it's really important to note the way in which Sessions and Rosenstein have exuded confidence when it comes to this investigation and how it's being conducted.
I think, Patrick, for many Americans watching this morning, they might think, yeah, this is nothing new. The president all the time is blasting the Mueller probe, the Russia probe, calling it a witch hunt, calling out his attorney general. Why is this different?
Well, he's basically sort of delegitimizing our system of government.